This one's about a little bit about nutrition. It's more about the effects of nutrition on the enteric nervous system and how that affects thoughts and how that affects emotions and how that affects all that stuff. For me, I'm slightly autistic, so it's the noise gets really really loud when I add complicating factors like carbohydrates, like coffee. And I didn't have a clue that coffee was had such a big effect on me. I've had coffee for the last 30 years, roughly. Um, Probably older than that. I was probably 6 or 7 when I started stealing my parents' coffee. Um, which at the time, which looking back on the fact that I needed the coffee, should tell you how much noise was in my head at that time. The fact that I was drawn to, maybe I tasted it once, maybe I smelled it once, but the fact that I was drawn to and redrawn to coffee almost without a conscious reason why. It wasn't a cool thing to do. I always got in trouble for it. It wasn't like a cool like it wasn't cool. It was just I wanted the coffee and I was addicted to drinking coffee. It could be literally like I liked cold coffee with cream in it, which looking back on that, what that tells me is that it was making it so I could avoid everything that was going on in my life, and I was having this conversation with my mom the other day. This is not a new conversation, and we've had similar experiences. She has a different life than I do, or had a different life than I do growing up, but we were both. I'll speak for myself. I won't say anything about her. She's an amazing woman. I love that. I love that lady. Um, but we were talking about how as children we didn't feel safe, and I don't know if that's from. I mean, there's some of that, the environmental safe feeling, lack of safety, feeling. But more than that, I think it was just an overall disruption, an overall just a low grade rumble of noise, I guess. Um, just constant intrusive noise. And I'm saying noise. What I mean is that if you have the guys at work, so for instance, the guys at work give me crap about putting my earplugs in at the slightest loud noise. Um, or repetitive noises that I don't want to hear. I don't think they pick up on the fact that I put my earplugs in when there's repetitive noise that's just there in the background. But if I put my earplugs in and that repetitive noise is gone, then it doesn't affect me nearly as much, and I'm not nearly as frustrated. Um, but when loud noises happen, somebody hits the steel table with a steel hammer. Um, that just blows up in my head. It just sends me, and it just triggers a lot of stuff. It's almost as bad as a stimulant. It's almost as bad as eating, a bag of gummy bears or some ridiculous sweet that people eat. Um, for me, the effect isn't as long because the noise is there and then it happens and then I recover from it. But um, it's definitely a thing, and that has been a thing since day one for me. Just constant noise, and in my head, and any outside noise added to that makes it even worse. It has made me in the past extremely reactive to the world around me. Um, very focused on survival and self-protection at any cost. And so as a result, my defense mechanisms, from being a very tender, very soft, very open child, to becoming a very cynical, very sarcastic, very bitter, very angry, raging, intellectual, logical, cold person. Um, Now I don't have any problem with logic or reason or spatial awareness or any of that stuff. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I used those things as self-defense mechanisms, and I used it kind of an interesting one that I came up with, and I'm sure it's not original. I'm sure more people than me have used it, but using using like brutal honesty as a self-defense mechanism, which that's kind of a paradox in and of itself, that you would be so honest with someone that they would think that you were telling them the whole truth about yourself, or the whole truth about what you're feeling. Like, how could you feel any deeper than that? That was so deep, that was so true, that was so honest. When in reality, yes, it was honest, but it wasn't the whole picture. It wasn't the whole truth about how I think or how I feel about a situation. And it becomes a distraction and a deflection from what's actually affecting me, to where I've counted the cost of this piece of information that I'm giving you now, and so I've assessed my risk, and I've counted that if I risk this piece of information, that may be a slight risk in comparison to if you found out what I wasn't telling you about what I thought. And so it was almost like a risk calculation, and I came up with that very young. Some of that was there was quite a heavy emphasis on being honest in my house and growing up. And some of that was, you look at child raising stuff, and you look at child raising stuff now, and people that have looked at the psychology of child raising, and if you're heavy-handed with your kid, they tend to lie, because they're afraid of getting punished, and they're afraid of whatever, and that's fine. Our parents, with some exceptions in the world, but most parents do the best they can with the tools they have. And the traumas that are passed on, usually most of those are not. I won't generalize. I'll say for me, my parents did an amazing job with the tools that they had, and I'm so thankful for the raising that I had, and for the lifestyle I had, and for everything that went on. And I love my parents. I go visit my parents and talk with them almost every week. I talk with them every week for sure. I visit them almost every week. And I love them, and we've talked through a lot of stuff, and we've been through a lot of stuff. All that to say that I had a tendency to lie because I was afraid as a kid, which then had me covering lies with lies, and had me, it was a huge problem. And so I think that self-defense mechanism specifically derived from that, where you use honesty as a self-defense mechanism, which is genius. And, I don't know where that came from, but it worked, and it has worked for a long time. And it's something that I've had to, because it's so easy to do for me now, I have to be careful not to be misleading people when telling them the truth. So if you can walk it back and listen to what I'm saying, I can tell you something that's true. Technically, it's completely 100% true. There's no lie in it. There's nothing wrong with it, but it may not be the full extent of how I feel. And as a result, there's some gray area in there where you can hide behind what wasn't said or what wasn't mentioned. And there are very perceptive people in my life who can hear what I'm not saying and can pick up on that, and can help me to see what I need to do differently based off of what I'm not telling them. Does that make sense? Anyway,